Alright, today is on a style of synthesis called wavetable synthesis. We're going to be looking at what it is, how it works, what it sounds like, and then walking through Ableton's basic setup of the synthesizer. So first of all, let's have a listen to what it sounds like. So it can take a quite simple square wave that sounds like this, and it can help you add so much interest, tension, release, and detail through modulation of the sound over time. And we can do this, I've used automation by automating all these parameters, but we can also do this using modulation and envelopes and LFOs, things like that, inside the synthesizer. So let's have a listen to what it sounds like with that evolution. So you can see you can create so much interest and so much tension this way. It's why I love it. It's probably my most favorite synthesizer in Ableton. It's very powerful. So let's take a step back now. We know what it sounds like. We know what it can do. What is it actually doing? So it was invented by this guy called Wolfgang Palm. He coined it wavetable synthesis. And what it does is it uses a bank or collection, so a few different waveforms, that the oscillator plays. And so the oscillator doesn't just play it in one static position, it usually plays it while scanning through the waveform. And so when you do this, it results in a completely unique new waveform being spat out the other end. And we call this a complex waveform because it's not a simple sine, triangle, square, or saw. Now things get really interesting when you do what I did in that previous example, is when you combine two oscillators which are modulating through their waveforms at different shapes. So for example, I just had that square wave here as the core tone, but was using the features of the wavetable synthesizer, controlling it specifically to scan through the waveform, okay, and that was just the volume of the wave coming up and the tune, okay, and then also the amount of that. This is an effect here. So by modulating all these things, we get so much more character than simply that square wave which we had here. Cool. So that's why wavetable synthesis is really cool, because you get to move through the different waveforms. Even I'll just do it right now, moving from a sine to a square. That can be like, sounds so good. Okay, we can get so much more interest. Our synthesizers can be so much more emotive. And you could see, instead of me just doing that, I could use an LFO quite simply to do that. Okay, or an envelope every time I know it was triggered. Cool, so that's why they're so powerful. Let's take a step back now and just break this wavetable down, look at its basic features, and then we're going to go through this matrix and modulation sources over here in another video. Okay, so like all synthesizers, the sounds come from the oscillator. Okay, we've got two oscillators and they've got a couple of banks. So we've got basics, collection, complex waveforms, distorted waveforms. Okay, and you can just click and drag through these. We've got filter-based waveforms, formants, harmonics, certain instruments, vintage synthesizers. Okay, so we've got all these categories. Like so many, I haven't even explored them all, and they're really good sounds. And then inside these, you have a few kind of classic presets. So this one, we've got a Juno 6, a double saw. So even that sounds wild. You can get so much interesting sounds out of that just simply doing that. I could write another song. Sounds like an old band, Crystal Castles, if anyone ever heard those. Cool. Yeah, we've got Jupiter, so many classic Oberheim, Sub 37. Okay, so you've just got some really cool synthesizers here. Mini Moog. Great. So we'll go back to. I really like that one. So we'll just leave that there. So that's how those drop downs work. So basically, just flick through until you find something that you love. Here's the volume for this first oscillator. Okay, and it works the same in the second shell. And then this is the position that's a parameter that's unique to the wavetable, and it's called the wave position. So you can click and drag up and down on this waveform here, or you can do it on the side here. And this is the parameter that you would automate. And that's what gives the wavetable in Ableton, and also this style of synthesis, its unique sound. So you hear this style of synthesis, it's become really famous recently with a lot of the synthesizers that are out there on the market, and that's why Ableton added this one in Live 10. It's the most CPU heavy synthesizer that Ableton has, but it's definitely the most powerful. Cool, so you can simply just go through the waveforms there by dragging this up or down, or automating that feature. So that is the basics of the oscillator. Okay, you can then, the second oscillator, you can turn it on and off, and you can do the exact same thing. Click another category, find another waveform, decide a position it should be in, or automate it, as you can see that I've done there, and automate the volume. Alright, with each oscillator, you also get an effect down the bottom. So you can have an FM style effect on the waveform, a classic, which would be more kind of, so depending on the waveform, it can be a pulse width modulation or a sync, ways to just shape the waveform. And then there's a modern applications here. So these again have implications on how that waveform is generated and then comes out of the speaker. So it's pretty incredible, and I'll just give you a listen to that. You can get, again, so much interest. So fold is actually folding the waveform back in on itself. So instead of being one repetition of that, it slightly starts to become many. That's why it looks like it's folding in and out. You can see that there. And warping is just the word Ableton's used for kind of stretching this waveform. If you could go back to simply our square, okay, you can see that the warp is just changing where that square waveform happens. So exactly like pulse width modulation there as well. Okay, if we go to classic, you can see pulse width modulation. If you haven't been through that already, is unique to squares and is just determining where that on and off part is for the square waveform. The cool thing about wavetables is that you can now adjust any other waveform with this pulse width modulation as well. With traditional synthesizer, that's only available with your square wave, and we learned about that in analog in the first synthesizer that we looked at. It was only available for the square wave. Okay, I'll go back to my vintage. Really dug that sound. Where were we working with? I think it was the double saw here. Cool. So that's how they work. Again, it's all about experimenting with Wavetable. I wrote this song the first time I opened up Wavetable and just started experimenting with the way it could make sounds evolve. If we zoom out to the start as well, it's a good example. I just started with a sine wave and helped it evolve slowly up to a square to create interest while running it through some reverb. You can hear it creates the interest as the melody evolves, and the reverb just creates some atmosphere. Could make more. So you can see so much is possible with it, okay? Love it. With the second oscillator, exact same features again. You can detune the oscillators like we did with most other synthesizers. And that's pretty much the oscillator section. Pretty powerful. Okay, we've got a sub oscillator over here, so just adds that deeper tone. 1 octave below 2. Can be great for making your sub basses. And you've got a little bit of saturation distortion here. Gives it a little bit more harmonics, a bit more tone. Okay, and we can also transpose it around and play some harmonies. Cool, so that's our sub-oscillator. I'll leave that off because we're not making a bass line. It takes us along to our next section, and it makes a lot of sense, just like all our synthesizers. It goes oscillator, filter, amplifier, basically, over here, and with a section for modulation sources, right? Either using envelopes or LFOs to create more unique sounds. So with the filters, the best thing about this is I actually got 2 filters. Okay, so we can create low pass and high pass filter settings at the same time. And this is a character of a lot of classic synthesizers, but a really sought after feature which wasn't in too many. The best one I can think of is the MS-20, using some really great high pass and low pass filters to create some unique sounds. So even this is a great thing that we can automate as well. And these are just Ableton's normal filters, okay? So they work exactly the same. They've got the resonance. Up the top here, you can choose their waveform. Okay, and you can also remember that great drive and saturation feature. So just like the MS-20, we can give it a bit more character. Just remember that's going to boost up your volume there. So maybe turn down the output if you do that a bit. Cool, we can get so much good sounds out of those filters and create so much interest, and we'll see that later. Finally, forget this, we're going to go through it in the next video, but our amplifier, our output section. We've got master volume, pretty straightforward. Polyphonic or monophonic, so it can play one note at a time, like bass lines, great for bass lines, or it can play chords, polyphonic, and you can choose how many voices here. With mono, we get the great feature of glide, so being able to hold those bass lines over each other and make cool little bends between notes. Great sound for bass line. And now onto unison and voices. Unison detune, a great sound. Huge saw synthesizers, from EDM to so many great Daft Punk, Justice, so many good sounds coming out of unison detune here. So we've got one built in. And even the classic mode starts to really bring other sounds to life as well. We'll jump back into our feature over here. So you can clearly overdo it. Somewhere between that 30 to 0 mark, or up on the other end of the spectrum, is where it sounds best, and it depends on what mode you're in as well. Again, such a powerful way to add that extra layer of atmosphere to your synthesizers. Cool. Right, those are the basic features. In the next tutorial, we're going to go through how to use the more advanced modulation sources, so the LFOs and the envelopes, and how to shape the amp as well. Exactly what we've done in analog and operator, but just how it works in Wavetable. Cool. All right. See you next time.